Hey, Jim. Welcome.
You're looking pretty.
Thank you. I'm, the rumors of my demise are premature. Yeah. Yes, but I can't talk about this one on camera. I really should. I wish I'd been keeping better notes. If I'd been keeping a journal. Yeah, well, that's what someone else said. Yeah, it's not too late to start. Right. That's one of the reasons I come in here and tell them is at least I have it on video. I can go back and find my stories. Sometimes I write about them, but yeah. Well, hello, everyone. And as you can tell, I'm doing better. I'm not healed yet, but I'm healing. And the swelling is down in my leg. I'm back to a normal size. I still look like a burn patient on the lower part of my right leg. I'm all bandaged up. I don't see my ace bandage, which is over gauze, which is over other stuff, and there's like 4 layers of stuff on there to help bring about healing on that. And I've got a port in my left arm that you can't see right now. I'm infusing what I call a medicine ball. It's a
Are those little negative?
Yeah, they're just little balls.
It's fascinating.
It's fascinating, yeah. I don't understand how it works because you don't even have to have it up high. You can lay it anywhere and it goes. So 3 times a day for half an hour.
Do you feel it?
Nope.
Oh, okay, good. Where are you lucky? When I had a port, my sister had to come over and do the IV for me.
Right. Yeah, no, it's come a long way, baby. So we'll see how much longer this goes, but I got new labs back last night, and things are continuing to look good. For you medical people, this will mean something. So C-reactive protein is your inflammation marker and inflammation marker. In normal people, it's less than 1. It can be less than 10, and you can be okay. When I got to the emergency room 3 weeks ago tomorrow, mine was 43.
Whoa.
And now it's down to 4. And
All right.
I'm thrilled. Like, it was the best news of the day yesterday. So we're getting there. It is slow, but we're getting there. And I'm at the point now where I'm seeing progress. Thank you all for so many concerns and notes and gifts and checking on me. And I've had people from all over. I finally wrote a Facebook post about all this last week, and my God, I unleashed a torrent on that. And, you know, the nice thing is I only had one person send me a note with medical advice. You know, when someone tells you about their health problems, they're not asking for your medical advice, unless you're a doctor. Yeah, anyhow. So today, Lord willing, we make it through the hour. We're going to finish the Gospel of John, which is beautiful because it will have been exactly 1 year. Call me Chris Will if you want, right? I think he's fast. I think he was faster than me. It took him 3 years on Revelation, though, so I don't know. Not planning to teach Revelation again anytime soon. Oh, God, yeah. Probably shouldn't even be in the Bible, but that's a whole other story. Yeah. Commercial, before I get to my next thing, you see this in the tapestry, but Faith in 3D is coming up. This great show called The Christians that's going to be happening. What are the dates, Nancy?
Thursday night, February 15th, and Saturday afternoon, matinee, February the 17th.
Okay, the 15th and 17th. With a cast, I think it's in the tapestry today even, or I read it somewhere. And some choir members, because there's a choir. This is set in a church, right? And I'm not supposed to tell you anything more about it. So I'm going to shut my mouth, except to say some of you may have seen this show 7 years ago at Dallas Theater Center. It's actually when Timothy was a resident here, so it was like 5-6 years ago. It was, it was 2017. Okay. Because I did a bunch of the talkbacks after the show, and Timothy went and did one or two, and George did a couple as well. So it's a great show, really interesting, very thought-provoking as well. So big plug for that. So we're finishing the Gospel of John, and I mean, how do you follow the Gospel of John? What in the world do we do? Probably not another gospel. I can say that. Romans. Okay, it's been a while since we worked through Romans. So I've got several ideas to throw out to you, and maybe during the week you'd like to send me some notes or thoughts about this. So one thought I had is, some years ago, when I was on staff, we created what was to be a successor class to Foundations of Faith. Have any of y'all been through Foundations of Faith? A few have, yeah. So Foundations of Faith is the whole Bible in 3 years. It's a big overview. But we created a successor class that didn't make it, but actually Foundations of Faith is now stealing some of that. The successor class was looking at great themes of the Bible and major characters of the Bible. A different approach. Now, I don't want to do the work for major characters of the Bible because that's a lot of work. But I am interested in throwing out the option of doing a short series, not a year, on major themes of the Bible, like redemption, justice, love, those types of things. That's one option. We could go find an Old Testament book to balance the gospel that we've been in. We could find another I'm open to anything except Revelation. I'm open to anything. So, yes.
I think it might be nice, but it might not be nice for everybody else.
Be nice for you.
Yeah, because this is what I've found illuminating, is like if we did a Pauline book, to at least spend a week or two on Paul, you know.
Okay, yeah.
Because some of us have had issues with Paul throughout our
Well, everybody has issues with Paul.
And then it illuminated, you know. Like,
Yeah.
oh, now I kind of get what's going on here. Or say the prophets or something, you know. Well, what was a prophet back then?
Okay. Again, I'm open to your ideas. Send me a note this week. Call me, text me, email me, whatever. You know how to find me. So as we look at this last chapter of the Gospel of John, chapter 21, I'm going to go back to where we began a year ago, excuse me, with a conversation about who wrote the Gospel of John. And there's a lot of evidence that John wrote the Gospel of John, but there's a lot of evidence that John didn't write the Gospel of John. And scholars are divided on this. And part of it has to do with the dating of it. By some accounts, the gospel had to have been written after John's death. And if that's the case, it probably was written by disciples of John who carried on his line of thought, right? Which would be a very common thing. However, there's an equal case to be made that John wrote the gospel. And all of this matters when we get to chapter 21 because there's pretty good, I think, convincing evidence that chapter 21 was an appendage later on. Now, once again, biblical scholars are about equally divided on this question. And you can find upstanding, important scholars who say, absolutely, it's part of the whole, it was there from the beginning. You can find excellent, upstanding scholars who say, clearly this was a tag-on written after John's death. So one of the ways we look at chapter 21 is if you hold to the belief that John wrote the Gospel of John, it is easier for you to come back and say, but someone else added chapter 21 after his death. And I think one of the most convincing cases, although I'm not taking a personal position on this because I don't know, I am intrigued with the idea that John wrote primarily the Gospel of John, and chapter 21 got put on after his death to clarify some things. Now, why do we say this? The reason we say this is if you look where we ended last week, at the end of chapter 20, it's an ending. You could lop off chapter 21 and the Gospel of John would be perfect. Now, this is the way I felt about Peter Jackson and the Lord of the Rings movies. They have 5 endings. And my wife and my kids love these movies, and I just can't bear 3 hours of this. Because you think it's going to end, and then, oops, there's another chapter. And that's sort of the way this is. Because remember, we have Jesus with Thomas, Thomas believing, and then the last 2 verses of chapter 20. Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. Roll credits. But then we have chapter 21, which Jesus reappears. I want to point out an interesting parallel, though. That passage I just read, go to the very end of chapter 21, and here's what it says. This is the disciple who is testifying to these things and has written them, and we know that his testimony is true, talking about himself, maybe. And here's the parallel. But there are also many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Sounds a lot like the end of chapter 20. So if you want to make a case for someone adding, disciples of John maybe, adding chapter 21, it's like they're going to echo the original ending of the book. And that's what we see here. Now, against this being an addition is all of the earliest known manuscripts, and 2 of them include, the latest of those 2 include most all of chapter 21. The earliest of those, actually, it's even later than 200. It's like 300 because the earliest of those is dated 200. And it includes fragments of chapter 21, but not the whole thing. So, on the one hand, you could say, well, look, it's in the earliest known manuscripts. On the other hand, you could be a data scientist and say, but it's only 3 manuscripts. And one of them only has parts of it. So, you get to make up your own mind about this, right? But I want you to understand why this feels... It's such a difficult thing that some biblical scholars who study the Greek and read the, everything, look at this and say, well, clearly this language is different than the rest of the Gospel of John. Others read it and say, well, clearly this is the same as the rest of the Gospel of John. So, tell me what you want and we'll find an expert witness to come testify to it.
They didn't invent PS until 500.
Yeah, the PS was not yet invented. Thank you for that. So let's go back to the beginning of chapter 21, and we'll just sort of take it. But I want you to understand the context in which we are seeing this. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Now, I'm just going to say, this to me does not sound like the rest of the Gospel of John. That syntax is different. But gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples. Notice this is not all the disciples. It is some of the disciples. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, we will go with you. This is also to me, this is a different kind of narrative that's happening here. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" They answered him. You can sort of imagine, fishermen out in a boat and someone on the shore. You can't quite make out at daybreak who that is. And he said to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. Now, you've probably sometime in your life heard a sermon about the faith of listening to what Jesus says to do when you're fishing. That if you cast your net on the other side of the boat, like Jesus says, you're going to have a haul of plenty. Maybe that's a Joel Osteen sermon. I don't know. I think I've heard it somewhere along the way. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, and here's an interesting detail, for he was naked, which was not unusual in this era for fishermen out on their boat, particularly in the middle of the night. Now, the thing that I think is fascinating about this story is he put on some clothes and jumped into the sea. Now, who gets dressed to jump into the ocean, to the water? People with dirty clothes. I mean, this is sort of upside down. Like, I can imagine someone might hold their clothes up above their head and try to swim with one arm so their clothes don't get wet. I guess Peter's wanting to be baptized here. I don't know. He jumped into the sea. But the other disciples didn't do that. They came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it. Where did the fish come from? And bread. Where did the bread come from? Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you just caught." Now, one thing I like about this story is it does show Jesus combining God's resources with our resources, even at this simple breakfast in Galilee. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, and 153 of them. Now that's very specific. Okay? So this is not the 3 fish and 4 loaves. Is it 3 fish? How many fish is it?
No, it's 2 fish and 5 loaves.
2 fish and, see, what do I know? This is the opposite of that, right? This is not lacking and Jesus needs to turn something into plenty. This is having more than you can use, and Jesus speaking to you because, now, there's a whole thing. If you want to go down a rabbit trail, go look up the number 153 in numerology. This number means something. And it is so freaky, I'm not even going to get into it with you because it would take the rest of the class. And I would be way out of my depth on it. But here's the quick summary. In numerology, 153, well, let me get to my note here because even this, I'm going to try to say, if you go to Wikipedia, there's a graph that shows you how the number 153 stacks into a pyramid. It has to do with, any math geeks here, you're going to get off on this. The 17th triangular number, as well as the sum of the first 5 positive factorials, and it's associated with the geometric shape known as the Vesici Piscis, literally meaning, wait for it, the bladder of fish.
But it's so much more realistic for somebody to say, "What are you using for bait?"
And this has to do with some of the ancients and their mathematic skills, and it's a particular ratio, 153 over 265, that's known as the measure of the fish. And it's an imperfect representation of this other thing. Augustine of Hippo argued the significance of 153 being the sum of the first 17 integers that somehow represents a combination of divine grace, the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit, and the law, the 10 commandments. That's how you get 17. Okay, we're back to the surface now. That's just a little side note in a deep dive for you. Just in case you want, you can go look that one up yourself, okay?
You have to admit, this is how many years after it happened before they actually wrote this.
Well, by the most conservative account, it's 60 years.
So they would have remembered 153.
Well, apparently it mattered.
Over the years. So
Yeah. I mean, it also means someone counted them. Or not. But 153 is not like 7 or 40. You know, when the Bible talks about 40 days and 40 nights, that's probably metaphorical. Don't shoot me, please. But 153 is just oddly specific, right, with this? So let's see, 153 of them. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now, none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Only the 3rd time. And it's been a couple of weeks. Now, I think in our popular conception of this, we think between the resurrection and the ascension, Jesus is with them all the time. That's sort of the thing we fall into, right? By assumption. But according to chapter 21 of John, as far as the disciples go, this was only the 3rd time. The 3rd. So that means Jesus is like coming and going.
where's he going to?
Don't know, because he's not ascended. This is a mystery. He's off counting fish somewhere, I guess. I don't know. I mean, we could say that Jesus is in some transcendent state. This is a really interesting mystery to us to consider. Remember, when Jesus first appears to the disciple in chapter 20, he says, "Do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended." But yet then Thomas touches him to believe. Joni?
My NIV cheat notes.
Good. I hope it answers this question for us.
Well, it just gives a slightly different spin on
Good.
it. It says the 3rd appearance to a group of disciples, though there have been other appearances to individuals.
Well, and I think that's true. Yeah. And that's an excellent point. But even this isn't the whole disciples. It's just some of the disciples who are out fishing, right? Now, before we get to this next part with Jesus and Peter, we got to stop and ask the question I think it's always important to ask: why is this story in the Bible? Why? Now, you could say, well, it's to set up what's about to happen with Peter. Okay, that's fair, because we're going to have Peter restored. And by the way, there are some reasons in Catholic theology this is very important to happen that are not as important in Baptist theology. So we'll get there in just a moment. I don't know. I'm interested in what you think. From this part of the story alone, what do we gain that we didn't already know? So if you're thinking as a storyteller, particularly when you have an economy of words, why include this story? What does it tell us that we didn't know or need to know? Any thoughts?
Up until this, I mean, I know what happens afterwards a little bit, so I can't quite pull them apart, but I think, John, there always seemed to be competition between the beloved
Yeah,
disciple.
right. We're about to see that.
Peter.
Yeah,
And like he sees him first, right? And says it's the Lord.
Yeah.
You know, kind of. But then your comment about the restoration of Peter and like maybe this was. I think that's why they think it's appended, right? Because
well, that's another reason. There are multiple reasons.
restores
Yeah.
Peter, but that's all I can think of.
I mean, in my view, we don't gain much from this part of the story that we don't already know.
Yeah.
Other than it's a nice, heartwarming story about fish and breakfast. I do like and pondering the thing about where did Jesus get his fish, and where did Jesus get that loaf of bread? And you could find in this, although there's no drink mentioned, you could find in this a mirror image, a throwback to the Last Supper. Because the last time the disciples were gathered with Jesus was around a table with bread and wine. But there was also other food, right? So they had dinner, and now they're having breakfast. I don't know. Jim?
How different, or is it possible, is it possible that this is the same story as told earlier about Jesus saying, cast the net into the sea, and it got filled with fish? Could this be the same same story?
I think this is the only story, isn't it?
Well, at some point he says, cast a net into the sea. So I remember.
Oh, right. Is that a separate story?
Who is Annette, and what did she do to get thrown in?
Right. Now, my Bible skills are failing me here, just when I think I know everything. Is there another story or is this the same one? I'm confused.
I don't know.
Please forgive me. I need to go back to school.
Is this the only time?
Someone look that up for us.
In that
Where he says, I shall make you fishers of men.
Oh, yeah.
I forget where that is.
That's early.
But I thought earlier on he had that.
Yeah.
He appeared to them and
You're right. That is correct.
But at that time, when that burst, I thought.
So the point is, if you're going to go fishing, take Jesus with you. Which reminds me of one of my favorite jokes. If you're going to go fishing, make sure you take 2 Baptists with you and not just one. Because if you take one, he'll drink all your beer. But if you take 2, he won't drink any. That's my favorite fishing joke. Yeah, you might get thrown in. Let's see what happens next. Verse 15. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? These what? These others? These other people here? These fish? This food? I think he means, do you love me more than the other disciples? Because Peter has previously, in an earlier episode, declared his undying devotion to Jesus, and then in a later episode, denies Jesus 3 times. He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my lambs. A second time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go. parentheses, he said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. He, being John, who allegedly is writing this. After this, he said to him, follow me. Now, you've probably also heard a sermon sometime in your life on the meaning of the 3 questions Jesus asked Peter. And you've probably heard a lesson in the Greek behind it, which is not as it probably appears in your head. This is a really interesting twist. There are other sermons from other texts in the Bible that you've probably heard about the 3 kinds of love in the Greek language. This text deals with 2 of those. Phileo, which is brotherly love, like Philadelphia, and agape, which is divine love, God's love for us, our love for God. There is not a progression here like you think. What actually is happening here is the first 2 times Jesus is speaking to Peter, he says, Peter, do you agape me? And Peter responds, yes, Lord, I phileo you. The 3rd time, Jesus flips it and says, do you phileo me? I'm not conjugating this because that's way beyond my skill level. So you get all of you Greek scholars, just calm down. Right? Jesus flips to phileo the 3rd time, and Peter stays with that. Now, you could probably make something of this if you want to. Jesus is asking about a deeper kind of love, a divine love, and Peter's responding in brotherly love, which is odd for Peter, unless you make the case that Peter is afraid because he has denied Jesus 3 times. You can see this being a sheepish answer. He's afraid to go all the way and say, I agape you, which he might normally have said before, because Peter is chastened some here. Now, the other thing that a good preacher makes out of this passage is Peter denied Jesus 3 times. 3 times he's asked, do you love me? So the restoration is tit for tat. For every denial, there's an opportunity to say, yes, Lord, I love you. Right? So that's how you get this restitution, because there is no place in this text where Jesus says to Peter, I absolve thee. It's not there. There is no absolution given. I like to think of this as maybe you've had a stern parent or figure in your life who, for them to say something nice to you is a compliment. They're not going to say, blabber, 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 you're the best ever, I love you, right? But you get something. Jesus is being a minimalist here, and he's restoring Peter by giving him something to do, to carry on the mission. When Jesus says, feed my sheep, tend my lambs, he's talking about himself as the good shepherd, right? Go tend my flock because I'm not going to be here. Yeah.
Well, I think it's kind of odd. I mean, if he is kind of in a parent position, that he doesn't say anything back to him. I mean, if my child said to me,
right,
I love you, I would definitely say, I love you too.
Right? So, we only have part of the story.
3 times.
Yeah, 3 times. And thrice. So that's a great word. Yeah, I love that word. Not once, not twice, yea, verily, thrice. Yeah. We've got to also ask the question, why is this story in the Bible? Why is this here? Whether it was appended or whether it was original, why is it here? Well, one of the cases you can make is that by 200 and later, there is an emerging movement that becomes the Catholic Church that wants Peter to be the first pope. Now, that movement is not fully formed in 200, right? But there is this idea that Peter has been given the keys to the kingdom. And one of the reasons you could say this has been perpetuated is to set up Peter as being given a mandate by Jesus to lead. Yeah.
But Peter really can speak to God.
Yeah.
You know, they say the popes can, but Peter really does speak to him. He can speak.
Well, because he was there in person.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, even in Catholicism right now, the Pope's authority is being severely challenged with his divine, because apparently God doesn't speak in favor of gay people, even to the Pope. And so you have bishops, particularly in Africa and other places, who are currently rebelling openly against the Pope and the Vatican's teaching on the simple idea of giving a non-liturgical blessing to a same-sex couple. It's what the Vatican has said is it's okay for a priest, if a same-sex couple comes to them and says, we'd like you to pray for our new house, or we'd like you to bless us as we go on a trip, or something like that. The Vatican said, you can do that. You can't go bless a same-sex union and say, I bless this union. But if two people who are the same sex, who are partnered or married to each other, come to you and seek another blessing, you don't have to turn them away. But all the bishops in Africa this past week said, we're not doing it. No. The Pope is wrong. We are not doing what the Vatican says we should do. And this is really revolutionary for the Catholic Church because, as you know, the whole notion is that the Pope has ultimate authority. And even though Pope Francis did not personally issue this edict, it came from one of the councils within the Vatican that he could veto, right? So clearly he's involved in this. So that's another sidetrack on this, but that sort of gets to the challenge all religions are facing right now over these same issues. But back to the text, you can see how this presence in chapter 21 helps bolster Peter's case. But hang on, there's more. Turn the page. Verse 20. Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. He was the one who had reclined next to Jesus at the supper and had said, Lord, who is it that is going to betray you? Well, now think about this for a moment. In the original context, it's Judas who betrays Jesus. But later that night, it's Peter who betrays Jesus. And is John like sticking the knife in here to say, remember what Peter did? Maybe. When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, Lord, what about him? What an odd question. What about him? And Jesus said to him, if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me. And now you can see this rivalry between Peter and John surfacing here. And it's almost like who's going to sit on the right hand and who's going to sit on the left hand of the glory here. So because of this saying of Jesus, verse 23 says, the rumor spread in the community that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Now, this is a really odd bit of thing to throw in, particularly if it's original to the Gospel of John written around 90 AD. This seems very much like something that would be written later to explain a tradition that had cropped up over time in the church. But what do I know? Verse 24, here's the reprise of the earlier ending. This is the disciple who is testifying to these things and has written them, and we know that his testimony is true. But there are also many other things Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Boom. Now we're back where we were a chapter ago with this. Let me pause and just ask, what comments, questions, what strikes you about chapter 21 that we've not talked about that maybe you'd like to discuss? Jim?
It has the feeling of you've been hearing the stories from your grandpa about things that happened in his life.
You're right.
And he's telling you all along, you've heard him all your life, and he's told these stories, and at the end, he writes his memoirs, and then, like, but what about the bear that attacked him? He left that part out.
He left that story out.
Totally about him at the base of the tree. So you
Right.
go back in there and say, and you remember back, and there was also the part about the bear that attacked him. You know, it's almost like talking about, and you remember at the Lord's Supper, the one.
It does have that feel that someone's trying to. You could make that case.
Or things that.
You could absolutely make that case. Yeah, you could. Yeah, Charlene.
Well, I have a comment
Yeah.
online from Mary Early that she searched "Feed My Sheep," and John 21 is the only place it showed up. She was thinking it was somewhere else.
Ah, okay.
But now this is my personal comment. I love this part where Jesus tells him, "If I want him to remain forever, so what's it to you?" I think that even we as adults, but especially as we compared ourselves to siblings,
Right.
and as we looked at our own kids, that sometimes it's not even. And you have to do what's needed at the moment.
Yeah.
But I just always like that phrase that Jesus.
Well, it's sort of snarky. It's snarky Jesus here. What is it to you?
Yeah.
Right? You can
Don't compare. Don't worry about him. You've got to worry about yourself.
Exactly. That's exactly the point of this, I think. Very, very interesting. Yeah.
There's one thing about Peter that I love is the fact that he is so enthusiastic and so impetuous. Now, sometimes he gets in trouble.
Right.
But he was so eager to see Jesus, he leaped out of the boat and swam to shore.
Right.
Now, I don't think very many of us would leap out of the boat and swim to the shore.
So we know from Peter, if we were doing a character study on Peter, he is impetuous, he is strong-willed, he is loud, he is present.
But he was loving also.
Yes. But then you have John, the disciple, who is much more steady, let's say. Dignified. Just not in it for the show, right? I think the whole thing is very interesting. So, again, the big themes of the Gospel of John: belief. I have written these things so that you might believe. Over and over and over again. If there are multiple themes, the signs that Jesus did, we've been through all those. But the thing that matters most, I think, is that the Gospel of John is written so that we may believe. John wants us to believe and is leaving these stories behind. Oh, yeah. Jim.
I'm just curious. I think you're saying that this could be an addition many years later.
Yes.
By perhaps a disciple of John.
Yes.
And so whoever this would be, he would carry on the theme that you're speaking
That's
about,
right.
that we might believe. Does this ever show up in any of the church councils, Nicaea? When was Nicaea in relation to the 2 or 3?
I'd have to go look that up. My
25, I think.
my church history is ancient church history is not great.
I see it. One of them's 325, because I just had that drilled into my head, but I can't remember which one.
Yeah, this was a deficiency in my seminary education. We had a visiting professor who I took, who had no textbook, and it was not great. So I've got some gaps there. Great point, though. So when I think about what John is giving us in this gospel, and it's true of the other gospel writers as well, John wants to give us a gift that keeps on giving. John is trying to tell a story that will empower us for later. It's not, the other three gospel writers are giving a narrative. This is the diary. This is the personal journey. John is crafting a story that is intended to inspire us for generations to come. I got down a crazy rabbit hole thread on something, the internet. And you're looking for something and you find something else. Yesterday I was down this rabbit hole and I don't even know how I got there. And I found this thread on people telling stories about someone in their family died and they had to go clean out the house and the stuff they found. You can see why that would be of interest to me. And these crazy stories about, siblings they didn't know about, and I mean, all these things. But the one that really stuck with me was a woman who had been ill for a year or two, but ended up dying suddenly, but she knew she was dying. And when her daughter went to clean up her house and begin to deal with stuff, she found a closet full of wrapped presents with labels on them for everyone in the family for future events that had not yet happened. For graduations, for weddings, for important milestones in their lives, because she knew she would not be there. But she had a present for them that would carry on after she was gone. This is what John's trying to do for us. This is what I think the Gospel of John is doing. It is a gift-wrapped present to us to help us believe and to keep dropping these stories for us that encourage us along the way at the significant milestones of our life, so that we can return to this book over and over and over again. And given what our need is to believe, we can find hope. We can find a memory that will inspire us. This is one of the ways I think the Gospel of John is different than the Synoptic Gospels. And it's probably the reason it's one of the most revered books in the Bible, and why so many people return to it over and over and over again. It really is a gift to us. Last thoughts from anyone?
It's been a great study. I don't care if it's taken a
Well, it hasn't been boring, I don't think. I mean, I'm the first one to get bored, so...
It is a good point, but as you said, he's writing it down because, as Grandpa's stories, after a few generations, they go away.
That's right.
You don't remember them. The rest of the generations never hear about them.
That's right.
If it's written down, then you pass them on to your kids, your grandkids, and they go, yeah, this was your great-grandfather.
Yeah, unless you were like really famous and,
Yeah.
books and stuff were written about you. Yeah, which is not many people.
Nicaea was 325.
It was 3:25, May to August. Couldn't help it myself.
Oh, good. Oh, good. All right. Well, thus ends the Gospel of John. Thank God, in the truest sense. Thanks for hanging in with us for a year on this with a few excursions along the way. Very good. Well, let's close with a word of prayer, and then Charlene will come with our other concerns. Lord, thank you for the beauty of the witness of your story in the gospel. Thank you for the gift that keeps giving to us, that brings us life and brings us hope. Help us, Lord, to absorb it and to hear and feel you and your presence with us through this testimony of one who was there. We give thanks through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Welcome back, Mark.
Yeah.
Thank you.